Okay, so I'm Jacob Sutton with Infuse Studio, and I'm going to do a little presentation that I kind of quickly threw together for about the development of Spirit of the North, sort of a post-mortem, as they like to call it in the industry, of what we did right and wrong. But first, I'd like to start off with just some basic information about me and my company. So I have a bachelor's in game design from Living Arts College. And then after that, I worked at Epic Games as a contractor for a year and worked on some pretty cool stuff, like the tech demo that was called A Boy and His Kite. And everybody just calls it the kite demo. But I worked on that, and I worked on primarily the marketplace team as a curator. I was the guy that said yay or nay to any submissions as to if it was good enough. So yeah, as for the studio, me and Taylor, we met when we were working on some other indie game for some other guy that we don't really like to mention, just bad memories of it. But we're really the only ones doing anything on the project, and we just decided to start making our own stuff. So we started doing asset packs for the Unreal Marketplace. And then in 2017, we started working on our own title. And then that took us about 2 years. And in November 2019, we self-published on PS4. And after that, I was looking for a publisher, and we decided on Merge Games. And they helped us release the next year on Steam, Switch, and PS5 and Xbox Series X, which I forgot to. Oh wait, no, that was this year. It all runs together at some point. But yeah, the Xbox Series X was supposed to be done in 2020, but that was a whole mess that I can get into later in questions if need be. But now we are currently working on our second title. So that's fun. We're finally done with the first game completely. And so the planning for the first game for Spirit of the North, we went to ECGC, me and Taylor, and we really started to think about what we wanted to do going forward. We were trying to be kind of like an outsourced studio where we did art for bigger companies, but we really couldn't get the clients that we wanted. It was all mostly smaller stuff that we didn't really want to do. And so we decided to go ahead and try our hand at making a game ourselves. And we had to decide on what to make, something that fit our strengths and weaknesses, because neither of us had ever programmed anything or made, even really worked on an actual game. I'd worked on tech demos and making things that were pretty, but never anything that actually was shipped and run on consoles or anything like that. So we had to pick and choose what we wanted to do. So our background was, we were good artists, so we wanted something that could showcase that, but the gameplay would be much less complicated and with more limitations on that than the aesthetically pleasing side of things. So unlike a programmer that makes programmer art but has a good game, we're kind of the well, I wouldn't say that the game's not good, but a programmer can make very complicated things but have very poor art in their games. Anyway, the kind of games we drew inspiration from were Abzu and Journey. Those two primarily were ours because they're very simple games, but they invoke a lot of feelings for the player that aren't ever really narrated or given. It just, the player kind of plays the game, and for whatever reason, they connect with the story that's given to them through the very limited information of the game. And it's almost like more of a spiritual connection between the player and the game. And the market for that is less than competitive games, but it's much easier to make with a smaller team. So in pre-production, we had some key decisions, like how long the game was going to be and what the main character and some of the overarching lore. We wanted to base it off of something in real life so that it could be, it's at least somewhat relatable. Everybody likes it when something's based off of some old myth or lore or something like that. We love that kind of stuff. So we figured it would be a good place to start. And we wanted the main character to be an animal because at the time anyway, there weren't all that many games where you played as an animal. And we didn't want to have to deal with any dialogue or like animating mouths or anything, because we're not animators. So that's why we kind of chose what we did. We were very specific in what we chose. And so we decided on a fox because there's a really neat folklore where I think it's Swedish folklore, there's a spirit fox that walks, and when it walks past its tail brushes up against grass, and spirit embers come out and it makes the aurora borealis. So we thought that was a really cool story to go with, and we really liked the whole Icelandic Swedish landscape idea, and it also fit in perfectly because I had just worked on the kite demo a couple years before that, and that's what that was based off of, was like Norse or Swedish landscape or Icelandic landscape, stuff like that. So it kind of fit in perfect that we could use those assets that I had worked on previously and combine them with new assets that we make to make a unique looking game world. And so in early production, we focused on character asset development and setup. That should always be your first thing, and getting your core gameplay mechanics down. A huge misstep that a lot of studios or indie developers do is they worry about their lore and their story and all their characters and write all these crazy, fan fiction things for them. And you don't have to do all that. Like, first thing you need to do is you need to make something that's fun. Like, just running around as a fox was already fun. So, it's something that we had never done before in a game, and it just felt right. So we started working on that and getting all the animation blueprints set up and the core gameplay, which at that time was more limited. We ended up adding more later on. All of these steps are kind of what you should do. We kind of had to sprinkle in different elements of these different steps as we went, because we realized that some places were lacking. But so these are just general, once you leave early production, it's not like you can't go back and do a little bit of this or that. It's never going to be that cut and dry, in my opinion, especially for an indie studio where, you have to be doing so many things. I didn't only work on the environment art. I did all the sound design and all that kind of stuff too. So it's a lot of things together. Anyway, so this is a screenshot of the first test scene that I ever did. This was just using a bunch of the assets that the kite demo had. And it was just like, it was perfect for what we wanted. Like a grassy meadow with awesome cliffs and stuff. So after that, we went on to production where we started doing blockouts. Wait, hold on. Oh, sorry. In early production, after we did the gameplay mechanics, we did the level blockouts, which is just like white boxing, just to get a feel of how far should the player be able to jump and how far, that kind of thing. Because you don't want to wait until you have a bunch of art in place and then decide that, and then you have to move everything around. It's much more easier to do it after that. So after we did that, we started adding in the art assets into the levels, and this is one of the screenshots from that. And and you can see all the blocking volumes and everything, and all the splines that the Wisp follows and stuff. And we finalized key locations and puzzles, and I started adding sound effects to really bring the game alive. A game is much more reliant on sound effects than you would think. It just feels wrong playing a game with no sound effects. It really started actually feeling like a game once you add them. And then in the polish phase, which is way longer than you think, especially for an indie team, you have to finish UI and sound and level design and everything, and any little nook and cranny that the player can get stuck in, you got to fix it, because they'll get stuck in it and then blast you on Twitter about it, and leave a bad review and say that the game's crap. So like, this is just a little screenshot that I took. It's just one of the many 100 places we had to fix where you could just get stuck. And fixing all the bugs is always hard, because you fix one bug and it makes another kind of thing. I mean, our gameplay was pretty simple, but yet we still struggled to get everything working as it should, and all together at the same time. It was like a constant back and forth of fix one thing and then having to go back and fix something else, realizing it was broke. So playtesting it a million times is what you're going to have to do, especially if you don't have a playtester working for you. Now that we have a publisher, we have that option. So that's really nice that we don't have to sit there and play the game a million times. And you have to do all of this while you're optimizing the game to run on whatever console you want to release on. So for us, it was the PS4. It was our target launch. I don't think that the Switch was really a thing yet when we started development, or we might have shot towards that. It might have been a thing, but it was really new. So nobody knew if it was going to be a good or not because of the Wii U. But anyway, PS4 was our target. So bringing all the art and everything down to a level where the PS4 could run it, like especially the base PS4, was very time consuming, much more than I thought. The base PS4 is not that great. Oh, and you have to start marketing. I would suggest probably around a year before your launch. So at release, we had a huge bug that a reviewer found, and it was on the last chapter. And if you press circle, you would glitch through the map and have to restart. And we had to do a day one patch, and we had no idea how to do that, because PlayStation doesn't make anything easy, and neither does Unreal when it comes to documentation for consoles. So I was working like, I think I spent like 4 days, like literally sleeping in my office on a little like makeshift mattress that I made, trying to reply to tickets as soon as I got replies to them, trying to get it done, just so that the game didn't launch broken. It would have broke my heart if it did. Because, I mean, it was like my baby, working on it all this time. And then another thing is post-release support is crucial. So any bugs that people reported to us, we would make a list, and then we would add them to something that we needed to fix, and we would fix a bunch of stuff and try to add a new feature or something like that, or fix a major bug and then do another patch. And then after that, it was on to launching on more platforms. And so for marketing, I think that I actually did pretty well on the marketing for this game. I got PlayStation to release the debut trailer on their channel on YouTube. So, I mean, they have like 8 million, maybe even more now, subscribers on there. So we got like, I think it was 20 or 200,000 views or something on our debut trailer, which was, it was a huge relief for us that people were interested in the game. It actually kind of reignited our our passion for getting it done, because we just weren't even sure if anybody wanted to play it at that point. We had played it so much. And then after that, we ended up releasing the launch trailer on PlayStation as well. So that helped out a lot, and we got a lot of offers for people doing reviews and stuff like that of the game, because it was on that such a prominent platform. It got it out to a lot of people. And make sure that your videos are up to as high of a quality as you can make them. Don't just slap them together and submit them, because the first impression of your game is very, very crucial. Like, there were so many times when we wanted to announce the game that we were even working on something. We were like, no, it's not ready yet. Like, we have to have something that looks really good and looks really polished. And we worked for like a year in silence and didn't say anything. And you just have to do that sometimes. So Spirit of the North has sold over 300,000 copies since November 2019. I would caution all indie developers or solo developers to be aware of account revenue splits when planning your financials, because all the platforms that you launch on are going to want 30% off the top. And then if you sign with a publisher, they're going to want some of what's left. So a review of what we did wrong was, we thought we could get the game done in like a year. We were kidding ourselves when we thought that. It took much longer than that. Granted, we didn't work all year round. Taylor had a seasonal job, so it didn't really take as long as it felt like it did, but it felt like it drug on forever. We should have published ourselves on Steam. It's not that hard to publish on Steam. You can look up YouTube videos of it. It just kind of slipped my mind. I was just ready to get a publisher when we signed the thing, because I was tired of having to deal with publishing myself. Publishing on PS4 was like the most stressful thing I've ever done in my life. And one of the big things that really kind of threw us for a loop was the second year of development. Taylor came back from his seasonal job, and he was just like, there's not enough in this game. We need to add more. So he ended up adding a bunch more stuff. And it just required a lot of rework and especially with level design. I mean, it ended up being for the better, because the game would have been way too bare bones without it. But, you can't really account for some things. Some things are just going to come up. And that's what I was saying about going back and forth between the phases. He ended up kind of bringing us back a phase from polish to back to production, and then we went back into polish again. And some things that we did right were we waited until we had something polished to show off and announce the game, and announced it on a big channel, which was, I think, the main thing. If we had just posted it on our own YouTube, nobody would have ever seen it, and it would have all been for nothing. The main character appealed to a wide audience. Foxes are very mainstream. A lot of women like them. I think our Facebook audience is like 50% female, which is pretty high for a game. We had very good visuals, which helps a lot with catching people's eye. And we released on Switch, which was huge for us, even though Switch kind of sucks. It makes up about half of our sales, just because our audience is on there. So you got to really figure out where your audience is and target those platforms. And one of the main things that we did right was we picked goals for the game that we could actually finish. This is a big, huge thing that it's kind of a joke in the development community that like somebody wants to make an MMO or something. Like you're never going to do that. I'm sorry, but it's not going to happen. Not by yourself and not with a group of unpaid people. You're better off making a smaller game, a single player game with a linear story or something. Just, you cannot shoot too high. You have to have realistic goals and expectations for what you can actually make, and expect to be able to finish it within a certain amount of time. So that's kind of all I got thrown together. I kind of got talked into doing this yesterday, so I didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare a bunch of cool stuff, but I'll take any questions that we have.
So the first question that we see online is, who is Taylor?
Taylor Christensen. He is my business partner. He lives in Idaho. We met online working on that other indie game. We've only ever seen each other in person like 5 times now, but I mean, we're like best friends, so it worked out.
So the other question is, if you could give yourself advice going back or to someone that wants to do this themselves, what kind of advice would you give them?
Kind of the last point that I was touching on is definitely make sure that you have realistic goals and expectations. You need to look up successful games that were made by, a small team or one person and figure out what's actually achievable, because otherwise you're just going to be wasting your time on something that's never going to be able to be finished. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, so talking to like AAA devs, I often get the input that they'll like test their own level before they send it off to playtesting, and then they'll get feedback, this is impossible, and they'll go, oh, it was easy, and they'll say, well, yeah, you beat it 100 times already, so it's really easy for you. You did your own playtesting. Did you ever run into that where there was a section where you're like, oh, I thought this wasn't so bad, but this, I didn't think that maybe it's because we're the ones testing it and we made the game?
Yeah, that did come up. So there's this section in the game where you have to jump on these geysers, and it kind of boosts you up to where you need to go. And I think Taylor ended up reworking that because it was just so difficult to get right. And I think that kids still kind of struggle on that part from what I've seen at conventions and stuff. So yeah, and when you're playtesting it yourself, you like half the time, after you've done it the 10th time, you don't even realize if it's fun anymore. So getting other people to play test it is really important. Because once you've played it like 100 times, you're like, is this even fun? Like, I don't even know. Does this look cool? Like, it's hard to tell when you've looked at it so long. It's kind of like, you have to have another set of eyes to look at something. And a lot of times just showing somebody something, or like, I'm sure everybody's like made something and then like gone to show it to someone else, and then you yourself notice something that you missed while you were just looking at it without having shown someone else, because now that someone else is looking at it, you're like more scrutinizing of it yourself, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and like, is there anything outside of difficulty? Because a famous example that always comes to my mind is like, I know in Killzone 2, they had a ton of input lag, but they didn't even realize it because they were just used to using the controls. And they're like, yeah, I'm pretty good at aiming even with this horrible input lag that they fixed in Killzone 3. Was there anything that wasn't maybe purely difficulty where you're like, oh yeah, why did we not notice that or do it that way?
Yeah, the controls for the character, they're okay, but they're not all that great. It's one of the main complaints for the game, I think. Is the controls feel wonky. And I think that it comes from the fact that it is a quadruped and not a biped. And most game systems are set up for bipeds and not quadrupeds. And like out of the box anyway. So, you have this tiny little fox and you have these big giant rocks or, these sheer cliffs. So like his back feet are hanging off, but his front feet are on. So unless you're doing some kind of crazy physics calculations and like IK solvers and stuff, we tried that kind of stuff, but we can never get it to work. And if we did get it to work, it would glitch out like 5% of the time. And, 5% of the time is not good enough. So we just were like, we don't have time to do this. Like, it'll take a year to fix this. Like, we got to move on and release the game at some point. So it was stuff like that. And just sort of the jumping mechanics, something about that people don't really like, but a lot of this for our next title, we've made a lot of improvements. We're completely reworking everything. So we've taken a lot of that feedback and improved on ourselves in our next game.
You said it was hard to get it onto a base PS4, at least just my perception from what you said. It wasn't just like you could throw it at the console. You had to optimize it.
Mm-hmm.
So was a lot of the legwork that you learned doing that enough to get it onto Switch easily? Or was that like a whole other can of worms above, like how much of it was, oh, well, it was actually felt harder on PS4 because that was the first one we were optimizing for versus no, they were both just very challenging.
So the PS4 was challenging because a lot of the art assets that were made for the Kite demo were for high-end PC. And so, the LODs were pretty high, and I had to go through and LOD everything, and then texture resolution. I had to figure out how to do all that. So it was a little bit of it being the first one that we did, but it was also just the fact that I hadn't accounted for the base PS4 not. I guess the PS4 Pro was much easier. It was much easier, but the PS4 is where we struggled a bit, especially getting the frame rate up to snuff, because the game runs at 30 FPS on base PS4 and 60 on the PS4 Pro. That's a huge difference between the two consoles.
Yeah, how hard was that? Because I know that the PS4 Pro is like, what is it, like 30% higher clock speeds for the CPU? Was it like significantly easier because of the CPU to get to 60 frames, even though it's just that much faster? Or
I'm not sure if it was the CPU. I'm pretty sure most of our bottlenecks in the game were all GPU because we weren't doing a lot of complicated like physics or anything. It was mostly all advanced rendering effects like atmospheric fog and light shafts and just density of polygons on the screen most of the time. So it wasn't really, I don't think, CPU bound, but I think that it could be because since the PS4 and any console is an APU, it's all in one. So I guess it was basically 30% more powerful in the GPU as well. So
it was way more than the GPU.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure on all those numbers. I just know that my process was always just take the game as it was, put it on the console, see how it runs, run some rendering commands to see what I could tweak, what values I could tweak without having to like go too crazy with actually redoing LOD sets and texture sets and stuff like that. And, seeing what I could do with just changing the values in rendering settings, like ambient occlusion quality and like even screen percentage. I mean, you can change screen percentage like down from 100 to 75%, and you really can't tell at all. And that was like a huge saver for a lot of things. Like even on the PS5 and the new Xbox, the game still wouldn't run at 60 FPS at native 4K. So what I did was I just changed those values for the screen percentage, so that it's rendering at a smaller value and an upscaling, and it works out very well. You can't really tell at all. Like the only way you could tell is if you had the 100 and the 75 next to each other and you were flipping back and forth really fast, then you could tell one was a little bit sharper, but that's the only case. And then for the Switch was a whole new can of worms because of the RAM. We didn't have to worry about RAM at all on the PS4. Thankfully, we never ran over. But the Switch only has 3.2 gigabytes of usable RAM. So then the engine took up about 2.4 on its own with all the rendering features we were using. So we really only had like a gig and some change for actual assets to be loaded in at any given time. And that meant heavier LODs, or bumping the LODs down again, and for the meshes and the textures, especially the textures. That's where all the meat of your downloads comes from mostly. And even adding some compression to some of the music, which is something that we never wanted to do for any of the other ones, because we didn't want the music to sacrifice. It's one of our, I think everybody loves the music in the game, so we didn't want to try to touch that too much, but we ended up having to compress it a bit on the Switch. And also we had to get the game down to under 2 gigabytes packaged so that it could be released on the cartridges, because the cartridges, I think they cost like, I can't remember, but to put together one of our Switch units, like with the box and everything, it's like $7. But as compared to like PS5, it's like $2. So it's a huge difference. And if we had had like a 4 gig game, we would have had to gone with a much higher cartridge size, which would have meant more costs, and it wouldn't have been feasible to do a retail launch for that. So, but thankfully, we didn't really have to compress anything outside of what we needed to just to get the game running on there to begin with. But that is something to keep in mind with Switch development, is that if you do have a bunch of levels and stuff and you want to do a retail release, it might not be feasible financially if you have a ton of levels that aren't all loaded at the same time, but you have to have all stored on a disk or, on your storage. So.
You said that the PS4 base was the target for this game, but half of your sales were Switch. So my last question is, what's your target console now? Because that's quite a dilemma.
It is. It's definitely something that we've been pondering about. Since most of our user base seems to be on Switch and Nintendo products, for the more casual players that they attract, we're really hoping that they release a more powerful console before we're done with our next game, because
will it be ready by 2023? Because that's when.
We're trying to target 2023, or probably early 2023, as our launch for the new game, and we're hoping
you're good.
Yeah, Nintendo would release something new.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
One last one for you. Given that Valve is releasing the Steam Deck and that's going to be a Linux-based platform, are you building native for Linux? Are you looking at any compatibility with Proton or anything along that line?
I'm not sure what Proton is, but I do know that the game actually runs fine on Linux. We have, I think there's like a site that ranks games based on their Linux compatibility, and the game, even with just the Steam Windows build, it runs on Linux. So,
are you talking about Lutris or ProtonDB?
The Proton, what is that?
So Proton is is what Valve is using to make Windows-only games run not quite natively, but sort of make them compatible with Linux.
Okay. Yeah, I've never even tried to do any of that, because Linux is such a small market compared to Windows, that I've never even had anybody ask if the game was compatible with Linux, just because it's not really our fan base or our user base. The only reason I know is because we have this one awesome moderator in our Discord that told me one time that it is compatible with Linux because he saw it on that website, and I didn't even know. So, yeah. Okay, if that's everything, then thanks for your time. Hope you check out the game.